This is the Web Platform Podcast, episode 48, Accessibility on the Web with Polymer. So we have a few guests today on the panel. We have Justin Ribeiro and myself, Erik Isaksen. And we have Alice Boxhall, Chris Joel.
Nice to be here.
And Daniel Friedman.
Hi.
So Alice is on the Chrome team. Do you want to just introduce yourself quick?
Sure, yeah. I've been on the Chrome team for around 4 years working on accessibility. Basically, that whole time I created the accessibility developer tools extension and library, and I've done a bunch of sort of accessibility plumbing stuff in Chrome as well.
Okay. And Daniel?
I'm Dan Friedman. I'm been on the Polymer team for about 3 years now. I wear many hats on the team, but mostly what I do is tooling and some accessibility work earlier in the project, and just generally interested in making Polymer accessible.
Very cool. And Chris?
Hi, my name's Chris. I work on element implementation for the Polymer project, so I've gotten my hands dirty implementing some of the relatively newer accessibility features that we released in 1.0.
Awesome. So 1.0 is really huge. We saw everything at I/O. Justin and I were there live. Woohoo! And Alice too. I saw Alice's talk on the gold standard. We can go into that a little bit. But what are the basic principles of web accessibility? It's been a few months since we've had a talk about this. And what are the organizations and rules that kind of govern it?
Okay, I can take this one, I guess. So, I mean, obviously the broadest basic principle is to make sure that the web fulfills its promise of being accessible to everyone in the sense of they can access it. In terms of what this means for implementers, it means making sure that people with disabilities can access things. From the point of view of the browser, we look at specs like ARIA and the user agent implementation guide to make sure that we are supporting web content to be accessible. And by and large, this means accessible by people using assistive technology, which then boils down to making sure that we express the semantics of the page in a reasonable way, and also do things like having accessible affordances, like, for example, keyboard shortcuts, but also other things, so that people can use interactive widgets. So the W3C has had a bunch to do with this. So there's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the specs that I mentioned, and there are also organizations who sort of campaign for accessible web content as well. And they vary by country. Anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, it's a lot of information. And we've had quite a few talks about it before. We had Marcy Sutton, Steve Faulkner, and a few other people talk about it. And there's different rules like WCAG, WCAG are called, Section 508, and Section 508 is really a really small amount of it compared to other standards, but it's pretty interesting stuff.
It's also America specific.
Yes, that's correct. Definitely, it's definitely American specific, which I didn't realize until I started working with it a few years back. I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. The one of the big problems that we've had with web development is that when you build these giant JavaScript widgets and components, you start to get problems with assistive technology capturing these things. But one thing that I've found in my own personal development is that it's not just about, for disabled people. I mean, it comes down to, like, I like keyboard shortcuts, like most developers, or I think many developers. And so the keyboard is pretty important for me, having forms getting focus. It's really frustrating when, I'm on a form that's like 100 fields, and then it tabs up to the top when I really want to go to the next one. And then I have to manually grab the mouse. And it sounds kind of like first world problems, but it's just sort of it goes hand in hand with usability. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. So not all of accessibility comes down to usability, but a sort of a large and I think growing proportion of it does. A way that I sometimes think of it is that there's certain pain points that we have, and for a person with a disability, that pain point may be painful to the point of a deal breaker, whereas for us, they're just pain points.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit to that, as we've gone through the Polymer catalog of elements and started to build out the accessibility features, you definitely get a sense that the more accessible an element becomes, the more refined it actually feels, like it's an actual full-featured, well-developed piece of UI. So adding accessibility is really more a mark of craftsmanship than anything, I think, for a piece of software interface.
Can we talk a little bit about the history of accessibility inside of Polymer? Because I know at a bunch of different events, the one that pops in my head is the Chrome Dev Summit, where you had Polymail, were showing off the Mail app, and there was a lot of flack on Twitter about how this is it's really performant, but half the people can't use the demo. So what is the history of accessibility with Polymer?
So a lot of the early days of Polymer was just getting to it's expanding our understanding and implementations of web components in general. We had a lot of, I would say, growing pains just getting everything working in Chrome and then in Polymer to make web components work in general. So probably that right about the Chrome Dev Summit Polymail was when I really started getting into more serious accessibility, at least implementation on Polymer side. We started with mostly just figuring out who to talk to about accessibility, finding the ARIA best practices and starting to work on those. And then one of the earliest things I did was accessibility keys, just getting a basic keyboard behavior or element that you could implement and in your own element to capture keystrokes that would fit the ARIA best practices. And then probably I worked a lot on that, and then and then we started getting more people on the team and moving forward. And then Chris joined, and then the ramp up towards 1.0, we really had a lot more people working on accessibility for elements.
And I think without like a repeatable process in place too, it's really hard to get a large team to get on board with it.
Yeah.
That's definitely true, although I think definitely in the wake of some of the criticism that we got last year, the entire team got on board very quickly because it was certainly not a desire for us to have a non-accessible user interface framework. It's just that there were so many competing demands at the time and a desire to ship a full-featured a framework as possible. But accessibility in our interface elements is definitely a top-of-mind thing at this point. We consider any regressions in accessibility to be P1 bugs and address them as quickly as we can.
Yeah, I mean, performance was a really big push throughout the project's lifetime. I remember, even now, but now it's definitely improved quite a lot in 1.0. And the accessibility, though, when I was starting to learn this stuff, there wasn't a lot of developer tools. I mean, now you have 10 on I/O, and you have there's Grunt and Gulp plugins for that, and there's a lot more tooling that's available. I saw Chrome is going to have the accessibility in Chrome DevTools soon inside of there. So it's exciting because I remember going through the specs and it's like, how do you parse through this in a sane way to get information you can use in your development? Would you guys agree that that's kind of the challenges that you had early on?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, tooling is very important when it comes to building out projects for developers. So just having the tooling available that makes it easy for you to assess, oh yeah, these accessibility features are missing. These elements need these attributes and properties. You know, it's the difference between somebody like actually adding accessibility into their app versus not even knowing that they don't have an accessible interface.
And what tools are you guys using as a team now?
Well, just yesterday, actually, I landed the accessibility developer tools, the same library that the extension in Chrome uses. I added to our testing suite yesterday. So I have just only one pull request out right now for actually turning it on for an element. But that will run the full audit from the accessibility, the Chrome DevTools accessibility audit. And
Oh wow, and that works with Web Component Tester too?
yes, I made it work yesterday. I still need to clean up the output to be a little more actionable, but it will run through and runs about probably 25 tests. The same, actually, I think more than the extension does right now because it's a little behind the curve on the library. But yeah, and it will tell you your color from things such as you don't have these properties implemented for this array role. You don't have your colors aren't right, all the way up to your focus. When you focus, your element could be occluded by some other element. So I really hope that we can, in the near future, get that implemented into all of our element testings, so we can be even more accessible.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is that going to be available inside of the Web Component Tester Git repo, or is that going to be something separate that people can use, or is it just for the Polymer team?
Right now, I have it. It's inside the Web Component Tester.
Okay.
It's mostly just a thin Mocha wrapper around the accessibility audit results. So as much as that is shareable, I mean, it's certainly not something Web Component Tester specific, but I just needed a good spot to put it.
Nice.
So that's where it lives right now.
And does it go through a lot of the stuff that's inside of the gold repository, the gold standard?
I have not lined it up with the gold standard just yet. I barely got it working yesterday. But I have at least on my roadmap to definitely make sure that those line up very soon.
And
Yeah, we should also. Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to ask you if you could, because you've done some work on that. If you could just kind of explain what that is.
Which one? The gold standard.
The gold standard, yeah.
Right. I'll come back to that in a moment. I was just going to point out that obviously with automated testing, you can only do so much. So for example, one example I often like to give is, say you have an element that doesn't have any semantic markup, and so you don't know, the assistive technology doesn't know that has some particular semantics, but the testing tool also doesn't know that, and it can't tell the difference. Except heuristically between something that shouldn't have semantics and something which just doesn't. So automated testing can really only do so much. It can certainly help catch regressions once you've got to a certain point, and it can point out certain really big errors. But there's a lot that it can't do. So the gold standard is a project mostly by I forget how to pronounce his name, but the Component Kitchen creators, and I believe the Polymer project are supporting them for that work. Is that right, guys?
Yes, we've met with Jan extensively and backed a lot of the gold standard work.
So the gold standard in general is just a list of best practices for any web component which aims to sort of be generic. The way that it incorporates accessibility is actually really nice. It considers accessibility just sort of part of that set, so it's not a separate pulled out section, but you'll find accessibility related items throughout the list, and they're identified with a little logo, so you can tell that they're accessibility related. But other than that, they're not sort of pulled out because, as you alluded to earlier, sort of accessibility best practices benefit everybody anyway, by and large. So let me see. The accessibility practices in that was sort of, I think, drawn from a little from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, plus also some internal checks that we use at Google for making all of our web content accessible. So, every single web project that we have uses these particular guidelines, and we took them and sort of took the ones that are applicable to web components and sort of merged them into that set of guidelines as well.
Very nice, thank you. So what are the changes that were made in 1.0 as far as getting better accessibility?
I would say that the majority of the changes that took place in Polymer for 1.0 for the sake of accessibility were really in just paying attention to the accessibility needs of the element catalog. There were certainly a lot of features that landed in the framework that helped in this regard, but accessibility for Polymer as like a body of elements really came about as like understanding where are the accessibility needs and how should the hierarchy of our element codes reflect like maximizing the reusability of different accessibility archetypes across our entire catalog of elements.
Go ahead.
Maybe as an example, Polymer 1.0 added a new feature called behaviors, which is sort of like a Polymer context-specific type of mix-in that allows us to take a body of descriptive Polymer properties and apply them to many different elements. And so if there's a body of elements, for instance, that have very particular interaction with keyboard tabbing and tab index and focus behavior, we can codify the best, most accessible practices inside one chunk of code, share that across many different elements, and ensure that as long as the focus behavior is correct in this one place, it's going to percolate down across a big swath of the catalog. I could probably keep going talking about different pieces of the framework that apply here.
No, I think Justin wanted to ask something.
Okay.
But his mic.
Well, yeah, hopefully there we go. Mic's working again. Yay. So we talk a lot about accessibility, and we know that there's a lot of more tools out there. We know that there's basically punch lists of the things that we should do as developers on the web now. But are developers actually going to do it? Because there's always been this sort of air around accessibility as a whole. Well, it's good to do, but we'll eventually get to it. I mean, is it more forward-minded developers now because the tooling's gotten better?
I actually think so. Although I think opinions may differ depending on who you ask. I definitely feel like I've seen a lot more accessibility tooling landing in the last couple of months to a year that will hit the front page of Hacker News or be trending on GitHub. And the more of these things are available to people, the more people start thinking about it. Well, what does it even mean for my interface to be accessible? How am I doing according to these heuristics? The more people who are thinking about it, the more people who are building tools, the more automation there is, the more likely your run-of-the-mill CRUD rich JavaScript app is going to have support for a lot of these best practices and accessible archetypes built in.
I remember Marcy built out some interesting tools for Angular, where she did ng aria, and we had her on read the source, go through some of that source code. And I like the idea that if you wanted to, you could have the JavaScript sort of add these aria behaviors on the build step too. Do you think that there's a place for that, or do you think it's like too much magic?
Well, kind of a part of the Polymer team philosophy in general is to try to reduce the number of steps between authoring a component and publishing it. And I think I can speak for the team there in saying that like it's great to have build steps that can do this, but the real win I think is having a really easy way to integrate accessibility in your component while you are authoring it, and know that you are how it works inside and out, how it fits into your practices as you're how it fits the ARIA best practices and our gold standard checklist as you're developing, and making sure that it works.
Yeah, I was saying to Rob at IO, Rob Dodson, and a few others that it'd be really nice if we took something like the gold repository, the gold standard, right, and say, have a tool similar to what you're doing with Web Component Tester to align it to that standard, but also to give it like a rating so that if you go to like, some, customelements.io, for instance, you could, even though there's going to be like 25 date pickers, right? There's different ways to sort of measure. Well, this is really good in accessibility here, and that's kind of what's priority for what I'm doing. So maybe I should choose that one. Because you can't it's inevitable you're going to have like multiple elements that do the same thing. So to find out, get a nice little. What do you guys think of that?
I definitely think that's a good idea, and it's absolutely in line with the tool that Dan has been working on as well, which you can definitely imagine something very similar to that taken out to kind of like a broader scope to apply rules defined or maybe expectations defined by the gold standard to any arbitrary component that gets put in front of the test.
Yeah, and it would extend beyond accessibility, but it would be very useful for accessibility for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the cool things about the tool that Dan built is, in addition to just running a set of accessibility tests against a particular component, the author gets to scaffold the component in the context where it's likely to be used and run the test against that scaffold. So not all elements are going to be made equal, and a lot of them are going to have some context-specific use cases. So I mean, I think that one of the great things about Web Component Tester and also just web components in general is it gives us the ability to sort of describe our UI and then apply the test in context.
It reminds me of my gaming days, creating Dungeons and Dragons characters where you couldn't be perfect at everything. You had some really high stats and you had some low stats, and you worked with what you got, what the dice told you. Because, I mean, when you're building a component, you can't be perfect at everything with that component. It's not going to be the ultimate, uber component.
That's true. It's definitely important to remember that sometimes a component isn't intended to solve a certain use case, although I think if you take a look at the YARIA archetypes, you can definitely start to imagine how a very large majority of the interface elements out there fit into one category or another. Even when you have something that you think is particularly eccentric, a lot of times you can find out ways to make it adapt to the concept of something that is well known and easy to sort of parse by something like a screen reader, for instance.
Yeah, there was a lot of breaking changes from 0.5 to 1.0. How did that impact accessibility? Like with like you have the core elements, and then you have the iron elements now, and the paper elements changed quite a bit too. Some things broke and some things didn't. Maybe not in accessibility, but could you guys speak to that?
I think while we changed a lot of how the components are built and how they pass data around, they still are fundamentally HTML elements. They still have all the same hooks for adding accessibility, such as ARIA properties and tab index and focusing. So a lot of that behavior has stayed much the same in terms of how it's used. Mostly the changes have come in exactly how much we're using it and I would say a lot more.
Yeah, and just to add to that, overall, I would say that accessibility across our element catalog has definitely improved over the time period of the last year or so. And in places where it maybe seems to have regressed, it's usually as a result of trying to come up with a more elegant hierarchy for how accessibility features are shared across the component catalog. And we're identifying any regressions as they come up and trying to prioritize them as much as we can. We're not perfect yet, and chances are we've got a long road ahead of us to achieve perfection, but we absolutely care that we do reach that goal at some point. So,
and as Matt said, before, when I spoke with him, he said that just do a PR. So if anybody out there, don't do a new issue, just do a PR to help out with these things.
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely accepting community contributions across the board, and accessibility is no exception.
And do you think that these changes being managed at a higher priority now? Do you think that the the criticisms of the past were the reason for that, or because I know when I talk with developers, especially UI developers, everybody wants to do it, but then if it's not prioritized by the top, it doesn't really happen, as Justin pointed out earlier. So I mean, do you think that people like Alice, who speaks a lot at conferences, Carl Groves, Steve Faulkner, Marcy Sutton, do you think that these the pointing out these things about web components, do you think that that's been helpful to prioritize these things?
Absolutely. However, I think as with all things in software development, it's really a two-way street. On the one hand, you have people who are setting the business priorities. On the other hand, you have the engineers who are actually building the software. I definitely think you need a combination of business priorities being set such that you care about your interface or your application being accessible, and also developers being aware of what it means for an application to be accessible and having access to the tools that help them do the best job they can.
Now, one of the things I haven't looked through the code base for these type of things, and I don't see it in a lot of other frameworks, so this is sort of an unfair judgment. But if you have like dynamic content, like via Ajax or whatever, or even alternative content, does Polymer handle that at all?
Could you clarify what you mean by Polymer handling it?
So like in ARIA, for instance, you can say, you can use that to say, this is something that will change. I forget what the exact one is. Maybe Alice knows. I'm not sure.
I think it's ARIA Live.
Yeah, like live regions, right? So like you'd be able to describe that information so that a screen reader knows to do that. And then if you have a modal, let's say, you can use ARIA to switch context to the modal, so that when you tab through, you can tab through in the modal and you can escape and all that.
So that's not something that ARIA does right now. You have to do that using just Focus.
Yeah, using Focus. So I guess yes.
Or using a dialog element in Chrome.
Yeah, sorry, I meant using Focus in that respect. So my apologies.
So we do have some extensive work done to deal with various aspects of focus across an application. It's not as exhaustive as we eventually want it to be, but yes, our framework does handle dynamic UIs that change, and then the ability to tab through the new parts of the dynamic UI. Nothing really negative comes out of that. With regards to ARIA Live, which you alluded to earlier, we have done some early exploration work into making that kind of a more fun feature to work with, although finding a nice sweet spot between all the browser and screen reader combos out there has been a little bit challenging. But it's definitely something that we're working on actively.
So if you were going to point someone to a very well put together element for accessibility, what are a few examples of these? Because obviously some of them are going to be better at other aspects of accessibility than others.
Sure. So we have a whole suite of input elements for example, that are sort of based around your form control archetypes. We have buttons, several different varieties of buttons actually. We have checkboxes, radio buttons, radio group, input, and text area. And all of these have been tested and have the correct ARIA roles built in, the correct focus behavior, the correct ARIA states and attributes and properties wherever relevant. And I'd say that these are probably, I mean, again, I don't think we're near perfection yet, but these are some of the elements that we've done most of the most fullest accessibility work on.
Well, once you're near perfection, then the scope is going to change, right?
Yeah, for sure. We've also done a lot of work on a few other archetypes, for instance, menu and menu bar. And we have a couple of outstanding issues for those, but we've taken a lot of the heavy lifting out of the hands of anybody who uses those elements, from having to sort of re-implement this idea of which item in my menu is focused versus which item in my menu is active. And these archetypes have all of the built-in keyboard commands that are specified by the Y-ARIA best practices. And what's probably the nicest piece of it is all of this behavior is codified in a reusable chunk of code that can essentially be applied as a mix-in to any element that wants to apply the exact same ARIA features. So if you have your own custom menu-like thing that you want to have all of the Y-ARIA best practices apply to, and you're using Polymer to build that element out, you can apply the Polymer iron menu behavior, is what it's called. And you'll get all of that stuff for free.
That's awesome. Now, how do you work it if somebody's coming on new to the team? Like, how do you get them into the flow of building with accessibility in mind?
Sure. We do a lot of code review, at least in the body of elements. I know the core team does too, but generally people who are working on the elements catalog are all code reviewing each other. So if we see something where for instance there's some missing ARIA role that should be set, we call it out immediately. It's a gating piece of review preventing somebody from merging a change. If there was a regression that was fixed in a pull request and there wasn't a test added, we add a test to make sure that regression doesn't apply again to this particular element. Of course, this is one of those things where, like, if possible, it'd be nice to just automatically have an assertion that says, well, this element should have this role and it doesn't, or this element should have these attributes and these states and it doesn't. So building towards that is definitely something that would be preferable to building out a accessibility suite for every single element. But we're doing what we can with what we have for now, and hopefully we can automate it and make it better in the long run.
I think also an important thing to do for people coming like new to, even just new to accessibility in general, is learning how screen readers work and what screen readers are available to them on their platform, and in general just getting used to the idea of having to navigate with the keyboard. I think also there's a few tools out there. I've seen some Chrome extensions that will enforce a high contrast mode, or try to like show you colors that are like intentionally more in line with someone who has high contrast needs would be able to see to and just in general, like getting people familiar with the tools that people who have accessibility needs have to use every day.
Right, like, yeah, absolutely. Building empathy is super important.
Yeah, as part of building out the Element Suite for the last couple of months, myself and Yvonne and Monica, who are two other members of the Polymer Elements team, have all been running screen readers pretty frequently, just to have a sense for, well, which screen readers respond to our Element Suite in what way, and what is it like just to be working for 30 minutes to an hour at a time, or even longer, exclusively using the screen reader as your sense of like what's on the page and what's going on. It really helps to tell us where we need to improve.
So you test in JAWS and the Mac one, I forget what it's called, in addition to Chromevox?
Yeah, we've been testing in VoiceOver on Mac and Chromevox on Mac, and NVDA and JAWS on Windows.
Yeah, JAWS is crazy expensive. I was like, yeah, let's get this on a VM and test it out.
Well, yeah, in that regard, it kind of seems, I'm not a primary screen reader user, but I think philosophically NVDA seems like an overall better proposition, just because it's more open, and I've heard that it's more standards compliant.
Yeah. JAWS is still the most used screen reader on well, actually JAWS on Windows is the most used sort of screen reader combination overall, but NVDA's market sharing is rapidly increasing.
That's good to hear.
In fact, there was a screen reader survey published by WebAIM not too long ago that shows just exactly the breakdown of the respondents towards like what screen readers do they primarily use or commonly use, and JAWS and NVDA seem to be like more than JAWS, especially. It's like 64% of people seem to have it as a commonly used screen reader, and NVDA is over 50. So making sure that we definitely have people using the common set of screen readers in the common environments goes a lot towards our accessibility testing.
Can we get that in the show notes so everyone can take a look?
Yeah, let me just can I just put it in the chat?
You can just put it in chat. I'll put it in.
Okay.
So what tools outside of I'm really excited to see what you've built with the Web Component Tester and testing, but what other tools have you used? Like, have you used something like Tenon by Carl Groves?
I haven't used that one specifically. I just started using Khan Academy's Totally, which is pretty nice. I've also taken a look at I think it's DeQ University's AXE. That one's also very that one's has a lot of engineering time behind it, so I look forward to using that more. That's just me personally.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't used any of those other ones, so that's interesting. I'm gonna have to go back and do you have links for those real quick?
Probably. I can paste them into the chat.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'll put those in.
So with so much of this sort of concept of where you start, in terms of accessibility, a lot of times we talk about the desktop, we talk about keyboard first, but now we've had this big shift into mobile, and obviously we have things like TalkBack on Android and things like that from a screen reader perspective, as well as on other platforms. I mean, do we approach this differently now as we start to develop, where the mobile web is sort of our first landing point as opposed to the desktop?
I think it's definitely a priority to make sure that your site works on mobile. It's definitely I don't know about first yet. In terms of accessibility use, I honestly just don't know what the primary breakdown is yet. But in terms of making it work on VoiceOver or I guess VoiceOver on iOS and TalkBack on Android, it's definitely should be important. I'm not yet sure how to automate those past just having one of those devices. So I think in general, the tooling on that, especially for web developers, could be improved. And maybe that's the big blocker right now from getting more people testing on that. But in general, yeah, it is very important.
So as we, in terms of, VoiceOver stuff, I mean, obviously, VoiceOver and TalkBack are actually pretty decent on mobile platforms, but, as you start to look down your list of things, in terms of other accessibility features on mobile, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of this, as Alice had pointed out earlier, is going to come down to a user testing these things. Is that still a major hurdle? Yeah, we know it's a hurdle on the desktop. I mean, there's some things you cannot address with automated testing. Mobile seems to be in a similar boat at the moment. I mean, is the fact that we're always going to have QA go through and say this is technically not correct, there's no way to test this. I mean, is that going to continue to be sort of our hurdle? I mean, maybe probably both on mobile and desktop.
Honestly, testing anything on mobile is really hard to automate. The tooling out there, you can definitely use Sauce Labs to try and do some mobile testing. You can definitely, set up your own rig to do mobile automation. It's really difficult whether you're approaching it from an accessibility point of view or not, although certainly accessibility is probably harder than any of the above. For the time being, I think we do have to rely a lot on people picking up a phone, loading up their website, trying it out, just seeing what it looks like, seeing what the performance is like, and also seeing what do the screen readers available on the platform actually do.
I think it's also important to keep in mind that accessibility in general is about meeting the needs of people, and it might not be possible in the fullness of time to accurately describe what needs people have without talking to the people with those needs. So at some level, every project that takes accessibility seriously probably needs to at least have some human use their project and see what they need.
Just to sort of add to that a little, I think strategically, the way that we tend to approach it in any project, and Polymer is no exception, is to sort of try and use automated testing to sort of catch all the low-hanging fruit. So catch the things that would otherwise be caught by a manual tester, and then sort of hand it off to a manual tester at the point where we're like, okay, we've done the automated testing. I've done as good testing as I can do as a developer who doesn't have a particular expertise in accessibility. And then sort of have them go, okay, yes, this is good, or no, this needs some more work. And it's, then it becomes a learning process of like, okay, yes, I need to know next element I'm developing, I need to look out for this thing as well. So for an organization like Polymer, which is part of Google, which is aiming to develop elements which are going to be used extremely broadly and by a very huge audience, we need to allocate resources accordingly to that audience. So that we're doing that manual testing, and for a smaller shop, you would be looking at a strategy more like trying to reuse something like the component kitchen elements, which aim to be completely generic and have all that accessibility built in, and then use them, or indeed the polymer iron elements. So something that you can take off the shelf, which gives you certain guarantees, and then build on top of that.
I think Polymer is definitely one of the more unique ones out there because there are a lot of developers working on it, right? Where, like you said, there's going to be smaller shops. I mean, Xtag, I did it again. Xtag is going to, they only have, a couple of people on it, but there's other people contributing, so it's definitely a hard thing to incorporate.
I wouldn't say that Polymer itself as a team is like particularly large, but we definitely have a great working relationship with the rest of Chrome, and the availability of resources is such that anybody that needs to have accessibility and does not have the resources themselves should be able to rely on something that Polymer or is similarly well funded and well structured organization could put out that we know can meet the accessibility needs.
No, I think maybe I misspoke on that too, though, because I didn't mean to say that it's not hard for the Polymer team to do. I'm saying with a large team, you have totally different challenges than you do with a small team like that. Like if there's 2 people on a project versus 30, you have totally different problems to solve.
That's true, although this actually kind of reminds me of one of the core premises of Polymer project and web components as a whole, which is to sort of emphasize composability and reuse. And I think in the long term, perhaps the rising tide of Polymer or the rising tide of any other component framework really lifts all ships in the sense that as we land on these primitives that are really useful to apply accessibility features across a user interface framework, more and more user interface frameworks can take advantage of those same primitives and get a lot of this work for free.
Yeah, I've been writing about that too, where the composability was so key when I first heard of web components that I was like, I have to get into this because this is like what I've been wanting jQuery and all these other frameworks to do, right? And now it's going to be standardized. And so I've been thinking a lot about things like Brad Frost's atomic design and how he breaks things down into these very small pieces and how that fits in with web components. You guys have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I haven't read that particular article. I should probably go do that because that sounds interesting.
So the basics though, I'm sorry, is that everything's built of atoms, and atoms are these small pieces, and he refers to them as the HTML elements themselves, animations, and very very simple things, right, like that. And you would have molecules, which are made up of these atoms, which like a good example is a label and an input, right? Together they do something, but separate they're just these very basic simple things. And then you can compose things like a nav bar with multiples of these molecules. They create organisms, and it goes on further and further. Just to give you an idea.
That lines up a lot with how we've structured our project in general, even so far as to call things modules and atoms sometimes. Yeah, in general, the only way that sometimes doesn't work is how granular you can be, and there might be times where you just for the sake of performance of your site you have to use something a little more glued together. But in general, yeah, that is our goal, to make something so composable that you can use it anywhere and be accessible.
Yeah, I would definitely say that a very similar design philosophy sort of percolates throughout our element catalog, to the point where we actually think about things like different accessibility features or focusability, for instance, as like an atomic feature of an element that can be composed into multiple different elements. As a broader commentary to where web components are just as a body of standards, I think there are a couple of gating issues that prevent us from really exploring this in a completely expressive way. One of the main things for us has been performance, actually. But you can really imagine, as you read through the idea of web components, how eventually you could end up with a body of elements where many of them individually don't really seem to have much use or much context, but it's once you start to combine them together and once you start to sort of compose them in interesting ways, you get these emergent properties of really accessible, really interesting, novel, helpful elements with kind of minimal work to sort of get them to all work together.
Very cool. So what else have we not covered with accessibility? Have we covered all the major areas?
Yeah, that's I don't know that we can ever really be done talking about accessibility, but I think the only one of the big at least thoughts that we've had on the team is how can we take experiences we've had building web components and grow help the ARIA spec and browsers in general grow their expressiveness for accessibility, because a lot of we've run into issues where it's just the way the tools are currently built in the browser are not they're not expressive enough for some of our needs, and we have to just find interesting and ways to work around some problems. But in general, the like something like the ability to set properties on an element that set its ARIA states, or have more, or even so far as to be able to in the browser have a sense of what an element on its own expresses. We can sort of do that today. I know there are additions to Chrome that are coming that you could, like, say, inspect an element and see what the screen reader would say for it, and what like have a sense of what the state of the element is. That and just in general trying to grow the state of the spec is something that just needs to happen in general.
That's pretty awesome. So you'd be able to go into the inspector and click on accessibility, and would it read it back, or would it just tell you the state?
Are you talking about the DevTools experiment?
Yes,
Yeah.
I am talking about that.
Yeah. So you can try this out in Canary right now. I think it may even be in Dev Channel by now. I'm not really sure. If you go to your Chrome flags, go turn on DevTools experiments, then restart, open DevTools, go to the experiments tab in settings, and turn on accessibility inspection. Then you've got to close and reopen DevTools. So once you've done all those steps, you can actually try this out for yourself. There will be an extra accessibility sidebar pane in the Elements panel near where Styles is. You can go in there, and it'll show you the accessibility information for a particular node, or some information on why there isn't an accessibility node for that node.
You crazy smart people. That's pretty awesome.
I've got to run.
Well, thank you, Alice. I scared her away. All right. So, I mean, the other thing I wanted to just say, too, is, like, Shadow DOM gets a bad rap, and I think there used to be discussions when we were really pushing Shadow DOM, and now we have Shady DOM. There used to be different discussions, right? I guess is my point is the Shadow DOM, the accessibility, I was really surprised, is pretty good from what I saw, but now I'm not sure, like, how the accessibility pierces through if you enable Shadow DOM now.
So for the most part in our elements catalog, it's been a point of non-friction in terms of, like, switching back and forth between Shadow DOM and Shady DOM. That's not to say it hasn't created some incongruities, because obviously Shady DOM is not Shadow DOM. It doesn't provide all of the natural encapsulation that you get from Shadow DOM. And there are definitely some places where just, like, basic accessibility features are different between Shadow DOM and Shady. So we try to smooth over all of those as soon as we find them. And then there are some things where, like, the platform just doesn't give you the primitives to be expressive enough to really come up with the most elegant solution possible to making sure it's perfect everywhere. But what's great, I think, about Polymer, the project overall, is we actually are exploring what these incongruities are and where the platform needs to improve to really allow developers to create fully accessible, native-feeling frameworks out of custom elements.
And then we can take our findings and give them to the Chrome team and go, look, right here, we need more power. I think the biggest challenge in general with Shadow DOM is just the fact that the ARIA spec is designed for a global understanding of the page. And so, for instance, there are some ARIA properties that take an ID ref and say, okay, these two elements are connected in state now, particularly for like tabs and tab panels and their content. Like, your tab needs to be in a tab panel, and the tab says, I am the owner. I'm the one who provides this content to the user. But if and that's great, but when you have Shadow DOM, you need to be able to have that expression with an ID ref forces your hand in how you design those components. So that's in general, like that we need to be able to take our feedback to the ARIA spec and say, we need these new features in order to properly express how accessibility works with these new platform features in general.
And you guys are both on I know I've seen you a lot on lately, Chris, on the elements. And is there like a place where people can go to on the elements catalog to to like for issues and PRs? What are the major ones that need to get fixed? Because I get a lot of I'm one of the moderators on the Google Plus community, and I get a lot of people posting stuff like, "Oh, this doesn't work in here," and I'll be like, "Well, go to the GitHub and take a look, or go to Stack Overflow." How do we get people there, and where are the best places for people to go in the elements to help out?
Absolutely. So the number one place where we do all of our work is on GitHub. And so if you can get people to file issues, if you can get people to submit pull requests, that's definitely the most helpful thing. Like Dan said, we're not a team with infinite resources. We have a finite number of people available to look at these issues at any point in time. And we've grown a lot in terms of the number of issues and number of pull requests we've had opened since our launch at I/O, and so we're currently coming up with the best strategies to address all of that stuff as quickly and promptly as possible. But even if it takes a couple of days to get a response, I would 100% recommend people can post issues on GitHub, people can make pull requests. If they're interested in contributing to the projects, we do all our work in the open on GitHub. So.
And I think you guys are GitHub first, right? You don't even have private stuff
Right.
that you put out.
Yep.
Which is pretty awesome.
We do like I said, all the work is on GitHub. When we're making a new element, when we're adding new features, it's up there in a Git repo. And we do serve Google customers internally, but in a sense, they get all the code second. So all the work is on GitHub first.
Okay. And as far as like the main core library, are there specific issues or specific pull requests that people can make?
Oh, I mean, the core library is as open to issues and pull requests as any of the elements. I think the only caveat I would make there is if you have an issue that is related to an element specifically, make the pull request or the issue against the elements repo. Polymer is organized such that all of the elements are in their own org and have their own individual repos. The core guys will definitely bring it to our attention if you put it on the core repo, but they don't like that all these element issues end up like kind of crowding out the space for Polymer framework-specific issues. So it's really helpful for us to sort of separate the two.
That's something the community has definitely seen over the past 6 months. Even it's been really, really intense because the popularity of Polymer has gone up, and people don't know where to put it because they assume that it's all part of the same thing.
There's definitely a visibility issue there a little bit, but now that we have the new Polymer Elements org, where elements live specifically, I think it'll help a little bit in terms of differentiating the framework from the element library.
I also think our element catalog that we've been working on should help hopefully to highlight these are the repos that actually have the issue, the place where you need to put the issue in the pull request. So yeah, I wanted to throw the element catalog in there because it's a great resource.
Definitely, I think you've done a great job with that stuff. I can't say enough praise on the iron elements and the paper elements especially.
Awesome, thank you.
Justin, you have anything else?
Perfection is hard. I feel like the problem with accessibility and the web in general is everyone wants it to be perfect across a wide range of things. And unfortunately, I think web accessibility as a whole, that's problematic. People want perfection on everything, and the reality is that you have differing experiences across a wide range of devices, a wide range of platforms and readers. I hesitate with the perfection. I don't think perfection is ever quite attainable on the web, let alone most other platforms. But great things in web accessibility.
Yeah, we have at least a motto that we have on the team is don't let perfect be the enemy of good, or at least good enough. And we definitely, while we strive towards perfection, just making something just partly accessible to is as a good starting point, and we need to, and it's good, it's the best thing you can do to make it perfectly accessible, but at least get something in there so people can use it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's valuable for developers to understand, is that, you know, sometimes we forget that our first pass may not be all the way there, but maybe it gets you a significant amount of users who you're currently not serving, you know, where you can do, you know, a quarter or a third of the accessibility you need to get you over that hill, that start point, and that'll get you going into the rest of it.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, and kind of on the flip side of perfection, you know, there are a lot of interfaces out there which are not only not accessible, but are actually in some ways destructive if you're trying to use them with non-standard input. So even just having people aware of what their interface will do if you tab through it and use keyboard input is a huge improvement over the status quo.
Just to let people know that, hey, there is a tab order.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
like just to make them aware, totally. So how do people find you guys if they have questions about the elements and what you guys are doing with accessibility in Polymer or Polymer in general?
So the whole team is available on our Slack channel. It's polymer.slack.com. We don't all respond in the general chat, although we are technically all available to direct message. You know, don't abuse the privilege, because that could go away.
Every single day.
Yeah. But at least for the time being, you know, we're all, you know, totally available in that Slack channel. We you know, do a lot of public discussion with community members. Scott Miles, who's one of the leads on the core framework, is always in there trying to help people out with little problems that they've got.
Yeah, he's great at answering a lot of the questions on there.
And you know, he's such a smart guy, and really is like, he's got his ear to the ground with regards to all the little problems people might have. So if you're interested in talking about the framework, or if you're interested in, you know, getting some help on something that you're working on, I would definitely recommend that. And even if one of the core team members can't respond to you, there are a lot of great community members as well, you know, yourself included, who are there just helping people and answering questions. So.
All right. And what's your handle on Twitter so people can grab you there? Start yelling at you.
I'm RoboDynamo on Twitter. It's RoboDynamo.
And Dan?
I'm Dan Friedman, DanFreedman.
I can imagine you were an early Twitter user.
Yeah, I get some wrong tweets sometimes.
All right. And do you guys have anything to add before we sign off?
Thanks for having us. And
yeah, thanks so much.
Great.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. We'll see you guys soon.
Awesome. Take it easy.
Yeah, take care.
Thanks, everybody.